Hi, I'm Paula Golden, and I'm delighted to be here tonight. I've spent 30 years as an educator and a mentor for young people. I've worked in universities and great corporations, trying to put together thoughts on how we can educate youth in the 21st century. In America, every child can look forward to 11 jobs in their career, at a minimum, which means we have to figure out a way to prepare our children to go into the world with the skill sets and the confidence to be able to be part of a modern workforce in the 21st century. Now, this is no small task. And for the next 10 minutes, what I want to do is share with you a concept that is very important to me and to the people that I work with every day, not only in business but in education, and bring it into perspective with regard to what we call the 21st century skills. How many of you have heard of project-based learning? Raise your hands. Okay, I see a few hands. That's good. We're going to talk about project-based learning, and I'm going to break it down for you, and then I'm going to unpack what we call the 21st century skills. And I'm going to explain to you how project-based learning helps a child bring those into focus, assimilate them, and use them going forward in the workforce. Now, before I do this, I want to make a small disclaimer, all right? And the disclaimer is this. We all know that we're scrambling to take ourselves away from a 19th century educational model that was developed in a one-room schoolhouse in 1850. We all know this. And so what I have to say is not to tell you about what I think is the best aspect of what we need to do to give our kids 21st century skills. It's merely one tool that needs to be in the toolkit for our kids if we're going to see them succeed in the modern era. Now, I'm going to tell you this through the lens of something that I know very well. I spent a lot of time around student competitions. And so I'm going to share it through the lens of science competition. But what I have to say really applies to learning across all disciplines, and as far as I'm concerned, all grades and all experiences in and outside of the classroom. Gary Beach wrote a book this year. Gary is the publisher emeritus of CIO magazine. And his book really focuses on the U.S. technology skills gap. But I assure you this is really a global issue, and so it could be titled The World's Technology Skills Gap. And what his concern is this, that we are no longer training for a manufacturing society. We're trying to reach a point where our children can think critically, collaborate with others, not only here, but around the world, can communicate and ultimately be creative and therefore productive and successful in society. Now, to achieve that, we have to bring certain tools to them because the 3 R's don't cut it. Most of us were raised with the 3 R's. What are they? Reading, writing, and arithmetic. Now, this is a little quiz. How many of the words start with R? Okay. So that's a weird thing, but we'll go with 4 C's for starters. And those C's are critical thinking, collaboration, communication, creativity, and Gary Beach throws in a 5th, which I really like, which is confidence. Because I believe in my heart that the most important thing we need to do through the process of project-based learning is give our kids the confidence to go out into the world where the only constant they will know is change. Project-based learning, let's break it down for you. Project-based learning is student-centric. Now, what does that mean? What's the difference between this and inquiry-based learning? Very simple principle. In project-based learning, the student comes up with an idea or a challenge or an open-ended concept that they want to explore. In this picture, this little girl at the top actually was interested in why her mother's furniture fell apart in the sun. Why was it that the fabrics didn't hold up in the sun? So that question of why, how, if, those open-ended questions coming from the kid's choice of what that kid wants to explore leads to a very important thing, the driver and the need to know. Once you need to know something, you're going to have to take the steps to get there. So the first principle in project-based learning is that it's student-centric. Now, what happens when you need to know is you have to gather the tools, you have to understand processes of doing research, you have to understand what technologies you might need to do measurements, and ultimately you have to collect data. You have to learn to observe. You have to learn to think critically about what it is you need to know to understand the thing that you're interested in, the why, the how, the if. And in that process, which is very different than other aspects of pedagogy, is the teacher or the mentor or the parent is a facilitator. This is a very different proposition than someone telling you how to do something. You have a situation where the student actually says, how can I get to this point? And the adult or the expert says, well, and it may be a peer who's just really clever. But basically they're going to say, well, you might try this way, you might try that way, or take this tool, take this approach and see where it leads you. Then what happens, quite frankly, in project-based learning, and this again is something that's very unique. So you have a student-centric idea, you go through the process of learning about it, doing critical thinking, perhaps you collaborate, but ultimately in project-based learning, you have to complete the job by communicating your findings to an audience. Now it can be an audience of one, it can be in a room full of people like this, it can be your classmates, it can be an audience of whatever. But the fact is you are called upon as a young person to stand and deliver your knowledge. You are called upon to talk about the excitement you feel for the idea you wanted to explore and bring people into that through good communication so that it's not just your love for it, but you actually teach them to care about it as much as you do. That process of having an audience and having to make a presentation allows you to really not only own your idea, but to share your idea and create a feedback loop that ultimately allows you to grow as a person and allows the people around you to understand in a meaningful way what it is you're trying to express. Now, these are big-time skills. So when I look at project-based learning, I think about these as being the first takeaways that you want to think about. Number one, this teaches a kid to be engaged in trial and error. I don't like the word when they say, oh, the kid's got to learn to fail and then they'll try again. No, trial and error. Why? Because the kid is excited. They want to take their knowledge about the thing they're interested in. Why, if, how. Or I want to build something. I'm interested in engineering. I want to build a car and see how fast I can make it race because of the way I design it. Or I'm interested in botany and I want to understand why plants grow the way they do. I want to understand a particular project in science. Or I want to involve myself in other things that just matter to me. In mathematics, they matter to me. So when you go into that and you engage in the study of it, trial and error allows you to explore. It encourages, and when you do this, of course, it encourages revision. And ultimately, you engage other people because you need to know. And when you need to know, you talk to your peers and your friends and your mentors and your teachers and your parents. And ultimately, this leads to creativity. So let's unpack the skills, those 21st century skills that project-based learning allows you to integrate into your life as a young person, assimilate, and ultimately feel very passionately about as the way you want to go through life and become part of the way you are, your being. They are, again, critical thinking, collaboration, communication, creativity, and last, and certainly not least in my book, confidence. Okay, let's talk about critical thinking. What is critical thinking? It comes from the Greek word kritikos, which means discerning judgment. Now, I happen to be a lawyer, and in my profession, when I was teaching law, we use the Socratic method to break down evidence and to understand truths by questions and answers. Critical thinking allows you to go through a process where you gather the tools to understand your idea or your concept or your challenge in a way that you must drill down into factual knowledge, drill down and understand how that idea, that concept can be understood from the lens that you want to look at it, through your hypothesis of why, how, if. And therefore, you must really hone some very, very important personal skills. You need to be disciplined when you do research. You make observations, which is becoming very objective. You're not relying on assumptions. You sustain focus. And quite frankly, for young people today, just being focused on a project and following it through is one of the most difficult things to get kids to do. Why? Because oftentimes they aren't understanding why they're being asked to stay focused. But if you take a project where the kid chooses it, where it's their big idea and they want to understand it, focus comes. And from this, ultimately, I believe you create a user-friendly way to teach kids the fundamentals of critical thinking. What is collaboration? This being the second of those 5 C's. It's when 2 or more people get together and they combine their skills and talents to achieve a common goal. Now, collaboration in the model of project-based learning is so fascinating to me because it isn't just a straightforward thing. If a kid is interested in something, they may talk about it over dinner with their family. They may ask a teacher or a mentor for time in a lab or a classroom after school to get a little more information. They may talk with their friends in the schoolyard and actually say, hey, you want to see what I'm doing? All of those ways of collaborating give a child a very important insight, and that is that virtually nothing you do in the world of exploration is done alone. You have an opportunity to review your own skills and strengths, draw from someone else their skills and strengths. All of this ultimately leads you to understand that tapping others is really a critical aspect of what you do in life. You're not a siloed human being. You are not ever alone in any work you do as an adult. And to learn this as a young person in this seamless way and learn to collaborate is a very, very important skill. You can't collaborate without communication, which comes from the Latin word which means to share. Now, communication, and one of the things I love about communication, and certainly you understand this in life, but we probably don't really talk about it as much as we should, it is both verbal and nonverbal. If a teacher gives you a look, your parent gives you a look, they've communicated a lot. And chances are you know what they have in mind if you feel that that look is taking you away from your own positive feelings about yourself. The reality is that communication, learning to read people, learning to express yourself, learning to defend your thoughts, learning to break down your thinking and your conclusions, all of this is absolutely essential to becoming a good communicator, and there is no job from the front desk to the C-suite that doesn't require you to understand this. So the project-based learning process that I really, really like, next to the fact that a kid chooses their own project, is that they have to stand and deliver that they need to present to an audience. And to me, learning to be comfortable speaking to others, whether it's one-on-one or in a larger environment, is a critical skill for the 21st century, particularly where many times your communication is across phone lines, across emails, across Skype, across any one of a number of communication tools that are in the hands of people today, where you have to be able to convey your thoughts and receive information and nuance that in order to be creative. And of course that brings us to creativity. How convenient. Now why is creativity at the end of this? I bet you're asking yourself, well, don't you have to be creative at the front end? No. Because I think we put a very misguided premium on the word creativity. We tend to think of it in really smart? No, that is not what creativity means in project-based learning. In this instance, it is from the Latin word to grow. And how do people become creative when they are 6th, 7th, 8th grade, being the kids that I work with in competition? How do they become creative? What they are actually doing is not coming up with that insight in a flash, in a moment. No. They are going through that process of trial and error, exploring, and reaching over time the insight, which is the growing process, the creation of a fresh idea. Now this just is, again, a point where the project-based learning methodology allows a child to explore freely and without anxiety about being right or wrong. Because there are no rights and wrong when you explore and you've come up with an idea you want to learn about. You're free, you're liberated, and that is one of the things that I like about the creative aspects of project-based learning. Mind you, I want to refresh my disclaimer. This is not the only way that we teach our children, but it's an important way that we can bring knowledge to them and the skill sets that they're going to need in the 21st century. Which brings me to my favorite, confidence. Because even though confidence is an outcome, you don't get there unless you practice, practice, practice the other set of skills that we've just gone through. If you have an opportunity through project-based learning to present your project, and I happen to pick a slide here of a young man who won a competition that I'm responsible for. The company that I work with, we are proud to sponsor a competition for middle school students. And in that process, this young man stood and delivered on all of those C's in such a clear way. And what he demonstrated through that is that, number one, he could think critically. He could break down his project with a discerning eye and the discipline that was needed to do that. Number two, he was a collaborator in the programs that we're engaged in. We believe in team play. We think it's extremely important. No one is expected to see themselves as the sole source of knowledge. They have to rely on each other. He demonstrated the ability to be a good collaborator. He communicated to the judges, or you see, this is what he's doing in this slide. He's sharing with them his knowledge, his insight, his outcomes from his research. And ultimately, he showed that he had the internal wherewithal to defend himself, his ideas, his values, and his project with the kind of confidence that we want every kid to have going into the uncertain world of the 21st century. So I'm leaving you with this last slide and a thought. I was on an airplane the other day, flying home from meeting with the people that we work with to build out our science fair competitions. And I sat next to a young man, and I was telling him about the fact that I was going to give a talk tonight. And he listened. He actually listened to my speech. It was very generous of him. You know, he had stuck with me for 4 hours on an airplane. And what he was very kind. You know how you talk to strangers on an airplane? You say all kinds of things. In my case, he had to listen to my TED Talk. And in the process of our conversation, he said, you know, it's interesting you should tell me this. Because when I was a kid, I really got passionate about fractals. I really wanted to understand how mathematics and visual concepts come together. And there was no program to do that. So I went to my teacher, and he gave me time in the lab to learn how to become a computer programmer. And I said, so, do you like computer programming? He said, I liked it because I wanted to learn something about fractals. I needed it for another purpose. And I said, well, where did that take you? He said, it actually led me into science competition. He went on to international science competition. And now he's an entrepreneur, a very confident guy, the kind of kid we want, a person we want every one of our kids to be in the 21st century, an entrepreneur who is taking those skills that he learned when he just wanted to learn about fractals, taking those skills, and he actually has a company that creates algorithms for financial houses to work with nonprofits to help them be more businesslike in the future. So it was a really inspiring moment for me. And the second inspiring moment was when I landed on the tarmac at a site where we visited with another student who had been a wonderful competitor with all of these principles that they'd learned through project-based learning. And I was talking to the superintendent of his school, and he said what I'm going to say to you. He said, project-based learning doesn't belong just in the classroom, it belongs in life. We start using project-based learning methodologies in kindergarten, and our kids start competing. This is 72 schools in a district in this particular community. Our kids start competing and using project-based learning as the tool in order to take an idea through this process and present to an audience when they're in third grade. And this is what he said, and I'll leave you with these words. I want every kid that I have in my sphere of influence to be battle-tested and ready for the 21st century. Thank you.